Okay. Today, let's talk about how we can develop the API. Basically, REST API. We are going to talk, and REST API, you can say nowadays very commonly used as a architectural style to make communication between the two services, different devices, or you can say from front-end application to back-end application, back-end to back-end application, or from mobile application, or from the web applications, or legacy applications, or any kind of application, server, database, cloud resources, third-party applications, or cloud-based services, are generally try to exchange data, some request and response. So these are the follow the rest is the pattern, rest is the style, the way the data communication happen, data exchange happen between the services. So we're going to talk the basic about the rest, representational state transfer, and what are the guidelines, what are the principle as rest API, and some basic understanding, right? So REST, as I mentioned, REST stand for representational state transfer. What do you mean by state? State means the particular times. What are the exact information about a particular object or particular things? State can be. Let's example one employee. What is the current status upon one employee? So might be employee currently in office, they are in a doing meeting or they are doing something. What the current state of the particular employee, or maybe current state of anything you can say. Current state of our state, Earth, Sun, Moon, or any object you can say. The state means the property or informations about the particular object. So whenever we talk about the application, like whenever one server application uh, talk to another microservice application, okay, so they are exchanging some object between the servers and the client. So this exchange happen only the state of object, right? So these REST is the, you can say, one of the architecture styles for the communication, data interchange between the services between the applications. So this is the REST is designed as a architecture style for designing network application. That means the two applications, two programs are communicate or exchange data via the internet. That means key one application connected to the particular IP address, another application connected to the networks, and both are trying to exchange data between the uh, services. So nowadays you can say it is a very widely used uh, uh, communication protocol while building the web services. Maybe nowadays, almost mostly the nature of application we are developing that are come under the microservice architecture. When you are multiple microservices, multiple services you are building, so each service is required the communication between each other. So this communication can be possible via the multiple communication channel. REST is the one of the most famously adopting the style, and nowadays all the mobile applications, all the web applications, or front end applications generally prefer to communicate with the server via the REST API. Okay, so and this REST, the terms was first time introduced by Roy Fielding in near about the 2000. So this is not too new, you can say, but whenever due to the involvement of microservice architectures, where the lots of services we are building, each services are required to send some data on the mobile application, on the desktop application. So all the front-end application generally prefer to take data from the backend services with the REST API. So REST is defined as a some principle or constraint. So generally, might be you have here two words. One is the REST API, one is the REST API, another is the RESTful API. RESTful API, RESTful API. So these two terminology changeable. You can use REST API and RESTful API. So generally, the API which strictly follow the REST architectural constraints or principle, that you can say known as a RESTful API, and some API that's follow some rules and some maybe some customized rules, customized principle, that is known as a REST API. So RESTful means that is the highly follow the REST principle. REST API may or may not be follow all the principle, maybe some additional rules regulation wise. We're going to understand if all these are the REST API constants. If we are able to know, and while knowing this, if we follow all these principles, then you can say we are building the RESTful API, because REST is the architectural style. They have just given this constraints principle. If while implementation this REST styles, we can say RESTful API or REST API. Okay, so these are the sometime, but let's here build the REST API or RESTful API. So both are the same thing, but you can say RESTfuls are more strictness toward the REST architectural constraints or principle. REST API can relax some of them. Okay, so these are the REST architectural principle, or you can say constraints while the building the API. So one is the in the REST architectural patterns or style, generally everything considered as a resources. Whatever the informations you as a client, one client applications ask, hey server, I need the particular data, customer information, payment information, details of the particular any informations, maybe file, maybe audio, maybe video, or maybe some content, maybe text, anything that you can consider as a resources. So now instead of saying the content or data or record, now the standard terminology say from the client perspective, client requesting I need the particular resources, and each resources must be give some identifications name through which our client know I want to this resource, or I want to this resource, I want to this resources. Due to that, they have defined each resource. Let's this is the customer information. So maybe you want to all customers or a specific customer, you want to create customer data, you want to update customer data. The each and everything considered independent resources. So here REST uh, style say, hey, this communications talk happen between the clients and server, from front end application to the back end application via the resource. Generally we are saying, hey, this resource I request, and this REST style is mostly preferred in the client server architecture. This is means one application is the client application, another is the server application. So this is the major differences here, that this information, whatever response is shared by the server, is mostly not more uh, designs for the customer. End customer is not able to here this REST API is defined. They make communication between the two applications. preferably is the maybe front end application to the back end application or server. The front end application can become a client and back end application can become a server. They are exchanging data. Okay, the data is not more human readable format like HTML, like any customer end customer can easily read and understand. This data is response by the backend server is mostly understand and read by the application developer or front-end application itself. So you can say REST architectural style is designed to communicate between the two devices or two server or two applications instead of the human being interact to the computer node. So this is intention of this REST architecture style is that one application can to talk to another application because the response is returned in the architecture REST style is not more human readable format like a plain text format or HTML format or some color or some fonting, right? So human can easily understand, so that is taken care by your front end application. Front end application collect raw data from the back end application and make human readable response and then display to the customer. So surely on the mobile applications, on your laptop application, yeah, your desktop application. First, your front-end applications, UI application going to the call server. Server gives some response in the form of JSON or XML, and accordingly those data parse and make a human readable format from the front-end or UI application. So this is the REST API generally using the client server architectures, and they support. Hey, they are stateless. That means ki one request sent by the client, sent by client to the server. Okay, and server respond you. Okay, and after that, server and not maintain any state. If next time you again call, server understand this is a new request, and again the next data responsive. But there is no state conversation between the client and server are maintained. Due to that, they are the stateless protocol. So generally, these communication happen over the HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol is a stateless protocol. They are not maintained the state conversation state between the client and server, and the response can be cached. That means if the same request you are depend, hey, I want to user profile for particular customer. This response can be cached at the server level, at the response level. Hey, you want to ask, hey, I need the user profile for ID 1234, right? 1234, and server responsive. So this response you can cache at the front end application side, or back end applications also apply the caching. Hey, you are demanding same request for a specific customer, already we cached here and response quickly. So overall the front end application is can cache the response, so that the front end application, let's see, one page they display the user profile and next page also they want to display user profile. So first time they call here from the client to server, next times they are just get from the local cache, from the local cache, from the local cache. So you can see this response can be cached at the client side, at the browser side, at the server side, and each and every resources, because his REST style say everything whatever the server are able to respond as services, you can consider as a resource. Not say hey record, or not say data, or not say message, something instead of whatever the informations you are going to respond, maybe user information, customer information, payment detail, history detail, something, whatever information you can consider as a resources. So how the our client RUI application, front end application, how to know the which resource I want to call. Each resource must be uniquely identified. That they require the uniform interface. That means they uniquely identify, they define one URL. From the URL, customer know, hey, I want to access this resource, I access this resources. Generally, these are the can be layered systems where multiple layer application can be, and sometimes you can also say code on demand. This is the optional feature, but sometimes our client request, hey, I need a server, maybe some HTML file, some script file, some images file, something. Those data can be respond from the architecture styles, REST style. This is the optional, but many places we are using the code on demand. And resource identifier. So each resource uniquely must be identified so that key our client can access. When resource representation and sometimes hypermedia means key first let's key they return the REST API return client. Hey, this is the next set of resources link so that you don't memorize. You can just click and access for this. So might be where server can respond to our resources link to the client. So these are the almost you can say 6 to 8 REST architectural style constraints are principle. While building API, you follow these principle, rigorously follow all the things. That means you can say you build the RESTful API, or maybe something, some rule you can uh, violate, or some rule you can relax. Then you can simply say, here is the REST API. So good just basic understanding again what do you mean by resource based. So everything in the REST API is considered as a resource. Maybe resource can be user 123 or product 456. So this is the one resources, this is the one resources, they are user 123 ID are uniquely identified. So resources can be here anything such as a document, image, video, even or collections of maybe resources or product or information. Everything in the REST API communication considered as uh, a resource. And these are the basic, you can say, standard for making your URL. So generally, REST API, the basics, you can say doc required, yeah, documentation required where client know each and every resources so that client on the need they can call them, they can use them. So we generally follow the standard protocol how the build the resource uniquely identified. So URL schema colon and your information and your application, maybe your IP address, host, port, path, and maybe some query parameter, some fragment parameter. So these are the standard you're making URL. And in this URL, let's say this is the one URL build like HTTPS. This your IP address. This is the port. This is your application path, and these are the some query input you want to give. Hey, I want to tag this, order this, and some other information fragment you can pass. So in generally, many different kind of URL you can make. Maybe HTTP, that maybe here user info, maybe your host detail, maybe port detail, maybe your application path, maybe your query, and some more fragment. So even sometimes this is the these are the optional, these are the optional, maybe these are the port are optional. So sometimes we can say, hey, this is the one in my IP address, I want to this path this application, sometimes simply so depend upon the your host name, DNS name, port number, but objective is that you can ensure that all the server resources can uniquely identified. Our front-end application must know. And as mentioned, these are the you can say client server architectures where the client and servers are separate and their client making the request to the server to access or modify resources. Here both things happen. You can say our client is also application, front end application, server is also application, and client can request to create the new resources. Client can create give ask the request to update the resources. Our client can request, hey, I want to get the resources, maybe single resources, or maybe list of resources, or client can send a request to delete the request as well. So all the CRUD operation create, read, update, and delete, all the operations you can say between the client application, front end application with the backend application, server application happen. So yes, a client and server are independent. They are independent deploy, maybe different instance, different node, different server, and the client is not depend on the server. They can build his own application. When the client, yeah, front-end applications require data, at that time they just start make a communication between server and get data. As mentioned, these styles REST API would be stateless. That means server does not maintain any information about the client states. So each request from the client to the server contain all the information necessary to complete the request. Any request come here. So server must response data on the basis of available information in the specific request. If the new, after some time again new request come, so accordingly whatever the request information, on the behalf of that only server respond. Server not know what the previously you responded, what the request, and they are not maintain, they are not know the previous request, this is the new request, this is the request. Server consider each and every request for the phrase form. The server does not maintain or store any information about the client previous state. Due to those, this is the stateless, and due to the stateless, our server can be scaled independently without. One request can be multiple instances of the same server. And in the case of your system scalability, if requests going user request going to highly increase, the same some request go on to the here, some request go to the here, some request can go to here, same customer request can go to the here because the application is stateless. So whenever we are designing application stateless, that means by default we are in future, whenever customer load user traffic going to increase, our backend applications, our server can scale horizontally without any kind of a data consistency issue. And for the application fast response, quick reply responses from the server can be cached by the client to reduce the number of requests and server. So first time that you get the user profile one, you receive here and just cache on the local in the front end application itself. And next time again you need data, next time again you have already cached data, and again use this. Next time you are not going to make a multiple remote call. So in this case you can say your server is so free and available to handle other customer requests as well. So in this way you can say our application response time from the user perspective, responses very quickly, and cache always help us to reduce the network bandwidth and unnecessary response times. And even you can say now our server is also free to take other requests as well as. So the server indicate that which response are cacheable and how long. And also we have to ensure that let's give cache here, the server response give you maybe after 10, after 1, after something, sometime this cache data can be change. So you can again ask the updated data and update your changes. So you have a some while the communication, client sends some, hey, I need the updated data. So server send you the updated data as well. And as you mentioned, there are very uh, strict rule for follow in the REST API while implementing the REST API. So uniform interface to ease the communicate between the client and server. These are the standard whatever the generally HTTP protocols we follow. So HTTP protocol have defined some standard methods. If you want to really some get some data, you have to use the get method. If you want to create some data, new resource some data, you have to either post data, you want to update some information of the existing record, existing resources, you can either put request, and if you want to remove some record or resources from the server, then you can say the delete request. We while the REST API, we rigorously follow these constraints. Get for only get data, post for if generally previously before a REST API, we are also expose our URL to the customer. Hey, this is the URL, one URL for customer, and the same URL you can get data, you can post data, you can delete data, everything's in the might be remember GSP and servlet architecture where we did. So in the case of REST API, we follow the very standard HTTP method, so that we follow the REST API guidelines, and we carefully decide our URI uniform. Each and every resources can uniquely identify, and while the communication between the client and server, sometimes some header information you have to also pass, like authentication, authorization, and page size something. And as you mentioned, your URL also contains some query parameter. You can ask some query parameter as well, and some resources metadata. You can also pass the content type, cacheable types, all the headers parameter you can set. So these are the uniform interface that are very standard, commonly defined by HTTP protocol itself, and some URL is specific standard. If we follow, if we rigorously, then you can say whatever the API you are building, that's is the fulfill the REST architectural style constraints and patterns. And these are the, you can say, system. The architecture of RESTful system is designed as a series of layer architecture. Each layer is responsible for a specific function, such as authentication, encryption, decryption, caching, and the client is not aware about the layer, and server can add and remove the layers. So here, like your front-end application, let's make a request. I need the one. Here on the server side, first layer maybe here, whatever the request come, request can be go to the your load balancer, then go to the maybe your API gateway, and API gateway can call to the, hey, let's check the authentication. After that, maybe check the authorization, and if authentication is okay, authorization is okay, and let's check the encryption decryption, and if check data available in the cache, or if not cache, then go to the actual application server, take the data from the database. So multiple, you can say, layer are implemented with the server, but these layers are not more bother about the client. Client just request and get the response data, but server can be add more rules, regulation, cache, filter, multiple filter chaining can be applied, but backend server easily add more chain of filter, chain of layered plus and minus, but client is always invoke the request. So due to that, we can say this is the RESTful system or RESTful API. And as I mentioned, the REST also have a concept of the code on demand. Server can provide the code to the client to execute on the demand. This code can be in the form of JavaScript or any executable code that you require. Generally, many nowadays applications build while the either all the images or all the JavaScript code, HTML codes that are also stored inside the server. Server going to response data, and those response HTML phase are page build, and JavaScript make interaction, CSS code, and everything maybe. So this code on demand you can also get, and client can choose to execute the code on the browser and whenever the situation want. So code on demand is also in the as a guidelines of the REST architecture. As we discussed, each and every resources in the REST API is the uniquely identified by your URI, uniform, and those URI can use to locate and access the particular resources, because in the server lots of resources available, maybe user resources, employee resources, payment resources, inventory resources. So each and every resources must be uniquely identified by URI. A resource are identified by URI, but each URI have a must uniquely identify the resource. Objective of the URI is each and every resource can be uniquely identified, so that if the particular specific URI is we can catch, because every times I ask the same URL, I am getting the same data. So these data can be cached. And as mentioned, the resources in the form of how representation, what kind of a generally resources can be in the JSON format, can be XML format, can be HTML format. But nowadays, more famous kind of a request and the response, both data format would be the JSON. Nowadays, very, very common and very, very fancy and very lightweight, very easily understand every client can be. So the client can specify the desired representation and server will provide. But server can give the flexible, hey, server client say ki, I need the JSON request, they respond JSON. They say ki, hey, input would be the JSON, response should be the XML. So this request response can be served. You can say server also provide the multiple representation of the resources, and client can choose one of them. So now have option XML, JSON, or HTML. But nowadays, the by default you can say REST API. That means that request and response data come always in the form of JSON. And last but not the least, but these are the hypermedia, or you can say HATEOAS. This the hypermedia is to describe the relationship between the resources. Might be the resources like user resources. So you can get the users. Maybe you want to user particular ID or user by particular filter ID something. So those scenario we need a next what the link URI would be, next URI would be, next URI would be. So somehow we need a hypermedia as a execution of application state. So is a key principle of REST, which state the client should be not navigate the application state by following the hyperlink. So server provide the hyperlink to the client, and which can use by navigate to the other resources. Here objective, because all the resources are the link, URL, everything server know. So is it a good idea? Why not server can provide to the links to the client, and clients just aware, hey, this is all the possible links available, and accordingly they can design our navigation page. So these are the also come under your RESTful API designs. Our server can tell as a response, hey, these are the my possibles URL for your next page and next screen, so that you can just select any one resources and you can access the request. So here just you can say server helps our client applications. Hey client, don't worry, these are the possible uniquely identified resources for you. Which resources you want, you can just access this URL and server can respond to it. So hypermedia is also one of the key you can say uh, principle in the RESTful API. So you can say these are the high level architectures are flow between the client and server. Here client can be web application, mobile application, desktop application, any standard application, or even one microservice as well, any services as well, not one big. Everything can be client. So here client means not the end customer. Be clear. Client also would be the one application. Okay, and this can client can say, hey, this is the IAM request. So here they can say which protocol I'm going to use, the HTTP GET protocol, and this is the my URI. Hey, this is the user slash 123. So this is the resources I want. The user slash 123 is uniquely resources. The user microservice have, they respond. They respond in the form of JSON. This is our JSON. Hey, this is the name, Bob, male, gender, and order. Then this response generally is not more user friendly, user readable. So this response is read by our my web applications and parse this data and make the very user friendly, customer readable information to the server. So this is the front-end application responsible to read the REST response and make parse them, extract data, whatever you want, which order, which format, which color, that is taken care of our front-end application. Maybe you want to get order, you can say get order. So whatever the here you have specify your REST URI, and after that our server responds accordingly. To be very simple, but mostly many powerful nowadays. This REST communication between the two applications, and these are the, you can say, some standards while the building REST URL we follow. So generally, names, whatever the resource name would be, names you can say, go with the plurals instead of a singular. So here would be always say, here say like a get query cards instead of query cards. Don't message, just take hey get cards 1 2 3 or get cards 1 2 3. So always use the your URL resource name as a plural. This is the guidelines. If we say hey we are building RESTful API, so these are the recommendation. You have to say whatever the your resources name would be plurals instead of the singular. Okay, and this should be noun also. The first things, all the resources would be noun, and noun would be in the plural format, and ensure that whatever the idempotency as well as this is the cards. So they you can request his ID like 1 2 3 4 something. So here that means cards means you are returning the post API, means they are going to the post data, means you are going to create new content, new object, new data to the server. Instead of like cards, here you mention the what the details of the cards as a post, right? Similarly, use the versioning. Sometime nowadays big applications, your API can change for the requirement. It would be good you can use the versions. So version would be always a protocol, and after that is a version v1, and then your resources, and then your particular ID. So generally you can follow this way as a card slash version. The preferable way, hey, always say your HTTP protocol, and then your versions, then your resources, then a particular ID which you want. Similarly, if you want some query, the query also say, hey, this is the card. You can mention, hey, question mark and query parameter. This is the standard. Your question mark and the standard query parameter. Don't understand, hey, this API can return the is deleted includes. Instead of that, you mention properly this API returns this, or you can say pagination. If you want your get API, don't understood by default this API must be paginated. If customers say, hey, I want to page size this and your page token is this, and according whatever the pagination you are implemented, you can apply the proper pagination link. Sorting as well as if you want to sorting, mention properly, hey, I need to get these are the items and sort by, because JSON has a name, age, field, multiple field. So you have to think which attributes the customer want to sort. Similarly, filtering, you want to filter. Here mention the filter, hey, this is a query parameter as a filter. Instead of just don't assume this would be return only specific filter. You have to properly mention the filter query parameter. And access resource access, I can also specify lots of header, maybe your API key, expiration time, request signature. So all the things you can mention as a your HTTP header part as well. Like, and the resource, maybe you want to one resources take the reference of another resources. You can mention properly, hey, I need a get request, and this is the my resource one, resource ID this, and corresponding to particular item amount, and this is a particular item ID as well. So everything you can, maybe you can add items to the reference item ID. So we have to follow some concept specific notation while the making the unique resource identifier. So if you follow properly the rest architectural style constraints, after that you can say whatever they're building, that is the RESTful API. RESTful API, that means you rigorously follow the rules, constraints, principles of the REST architectural style patterns. So lots of use cases are places where you can say this REST API you can use. all the nowadays web applications, whatever the web applications are nowadays, all the mobile applications. So on the mobile application, whatever the data, dynamic data you are displaying on the mobile application, lots of chart, tabular format data, different interactions of data happen. So these data which you see on your web applications or the mobile application, it's come from the server. So your front-end application, your UI application, make a request to the backend server, and backend application responds to the JSON data. In this JSON data, parsed by your applications, UI application, and make the very high interactive, colorful response to the customer. Customer can be view on the web application or the mobile application. So these are the places where REST API are commonly used to build the web API and expose data and functionality to the web application. Similarly, REST API used to build a mobile application to interact the server side data as well. And nowadays, all the microservice, also microservice API communicate between the microservice in distributed environment via the REST API. Lots of very standards patterns are built how one microservice communicate to another microservice from the REST API from other channel as. So REST is API also used between the your UI front-end application to the backend application, or from the backend application to another backend application, or microservice to microservice. Please note this API, REST API, is generally designed for application. So here, client, not the actual client or customer, can view the response. Here, our UI application, our front-end applications, mobile application, can the user's client for the REST API. After client, that's mobile apps, is a client application can read the data, and after that parse them and make user friendly like HTML response, colorful response, it different format of the responses. And these are the some, you can say, benefits about this REST API. Platform independence. That means REST API can be consumed by any platform, including web, mobile, desktop. You can say you can just build only one specific API. That API are consumed by your mobile application, web application, desktop applications, or one another microservice. So same one API can be even these applications are maybe backend application built in the Java, and a front-end application can be built in the React, can be built in the Kotlin, can be built in the different programming languages. So these front-end applications and server backend application are both are the independent, and once any application require the data, they can exchange data from the REST API. And due to the rest concerns are a principle, your applications are can become a more scalability, because on the demand your application is the stateless. So stateless application can be horizontally scaled as much as because now your application can handle high traffic user request or volume data. So due to the stateless principle in the REST architectural style, due to that you can say your system by default have a functionality, your system can be highly scalable, and it will be also support the flexibility. Your REST API can easily extend and modify it without affecting the existing client. So here the API, multiple API expose, and if you want to some new customer want to additional API can expose, and they can even modify the existing API with a different versioning. And so the different customer can use the different version API, different customer can use the different version API. They support the more flexibility, new feature, new enhancement, existing API change, the different versioning concept which help us the without affecting other customer. Our API can be modified, enhanced, right? Yeah, added more new API. And the best way, this is very easy to implement. easy to implement. REST API is relatively simple to implement, especially with the help of framework and library. Nowadays, like Spring Boot, like a Quarkus, and many frameworks help building REST API is very simple than anything. Simplest way nowadays to build the REST API. And for that, you can going to the build REST API using the different programming language. Hey, you can use the Java, .NET, Go, Python, Node, Ruby, and lots of you can say frameworks library, which help us make developer life is so easy nowadays. If you want to build a String API, is RESTful API, just use a Spring Boot. Within a 5 minute, you can build the API and test. You can use Quarkus, you can use Micronaut, you can use Django, you can Express, Ruby on Rails. Lots of frameworks and library exist that help us to build REST API. Due to the easy implementation, a lots of open source framework and library exist for the developing the REST API. Due to that, nowadays most popular uh, communication protocol between your front end application to the back end application or UI application to the back end application is the REST API. And once you are going to use the REST API, because the server have a lots of resources, and they have exposed the high volume of the uniquely identify the resources. So this is very hard to manage this API. So to managing API nowadays, you can add one more layer in your system is the API gateway. And nowadays API gateway may be HA proxy, NG Linux, API, Amazon API gateway, Google, Amazon. So everyone you have to, if you are developing lots of API, you have to also need to the manage API. So for the managing API, one place is API gateway. You can apply some authentication, authorization, logging, tracing, different things. Common concert functionality can be taken care about the API gateway. API gateway can also work as a load balancer some places as well as. So you can say once you are going to developing API, you have to also consider the API gateway in your application so that your application can easily manage all the resources that's exposed as a REST API. And lots of example, very you get a huge example, but a couple of like AWS itself providing the wide range of REST API to its services, including S3, EC3, Lambda, whatever the on the nowadays on the cloud you are getting the cloud services in the form of REST API nowadays. Because you are going to log in on the browser, AWS, log in the AWS, and after that in the browser, lots of you want to storage, dynamic instances, machine, lambda function, server. You are doing request on the basis of browser. Browser call, go to the backend services and backend response and fulfill your search. That has happened between internally. AWS use the REST API. Even GCP, Google Cloud Platform, also use the last of REST API communication to compute all the storage, cloud services, cloud function. Even a Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, these also use the RESTful API to including the Graph API and marketing API, other API as well as. But the Twitter also have a lots of Twitter API for the developer nowadays. For maybe Twitter, AWS, Google, Azure, they have provided lots of URL to integrate his cloud services to the third party vendor, custom application provider as well as. You can say lots of techniques, but we have to must aware some very useful practices while developing or using the rest. Ensure that use the meaningful resource name, because the client is going to read your access your resources. If your resource name properly follow the nouns and properly it will be plurals and all the guidelines which REST principle have. If we follow, that means your descriptive name for the resources make it easy for the client to understand what the resource represent, right? Similarly, we have to properly use the HTTP code correctly. because your API respond on the HTTP status code. We have to. So here, here say if you really follow the you are want to fetching data, just go to the HTTP get method. If you want to create some new content, new data, let's go for the post. You want to modify some existing resources, let's go for the update. So properly, whatever the HTTP methods, get, put, post, patch, delete, everything. Be carefully choose your API. And every API follow the HTTP methods. The HTTP method accordingly we have to follow the standard HTTP code. So customer client can aware, hey, our API the success or failure or what kind of information. So we have be carefully as a API response code which generate by the server. They are properly mentioned. Hey, this is a success response, failure response, server side failure, client side failure, what side failure. Be carefully. We have to. These are the very standard code like 200 create success response, 201 API post content created, and nowadays due to the popularity of REST API, we have to document our API. Nowadays, very popular, maybe Swagger documentation and any other form of documentation. Document your API so that your API can be easily read by the client. What the your application URL, what is the request parameter, what the response parameter, what the request attribute structure would be, what the response structure would be. So nowadays, lots of API response is very complex. So be carefully. We have to expose our Open API doc or Swagger documentation that help us client or any third party vendor easily can test your API, customize your API, consume your API. So our objective as a server, REST API as a server side, we have to well document maybe whatever the follow Open API or Swagger API. These are the nowadays very simple. Just use some standard dependency library. Just annotate. Hey, so these Swagger or Open API, you can say easily document your each and every REST API, and from the from the browser anyone can go to test or get API, post API, delete API very easily, and all the request response they can easily understand. So documentation is also very key part of your REST API. You are exposed REST API but not available documentation. Client is frustrated to use them. Client don't understand the meaning, don't understand the which URL for which resource purpose. So it would be good we have to document be carefully all our REST API. So these are you can say some standard HTTPS code we have to follow. Like if your API has one any number, that means your request was received and continue processing, right? Sometime maybe and two, and after that some number, that means it's successful response code. Three, that means your redirection means keep further action needed to taken in order to complete this request. Fourth means there are some client error, maybe your bad request authentication. Similarly, five series server error means the server are expanding some error. So be please be carefully use the status code like one number something like 100 continue, 101 switch protocol, 102 processing something, 103 early hint something in this way. Or 20 means 200 your success response means okay, it's okay whatever you want, the successfully server is responded. Maybe 201 some new contents are created, 204 your request, 202 request accepted, maybe 203 non-authoritative request, 204 many places you can find 204 what the resources customers are requested, client application requested, those content not found. So no content available. Yeah, reset content, partially content you can say. So multi-part status, multiple resources you can. Similarly, three with the three dot multiple operation with the three zero, like maybe here something 30 found, 304 not modified something, and for you this is something client either maybe the request, the input maybe your bad request, invalid request something, 40400. Maybe you are not application required the authentication, that means 401 you are not authentication. Some payment required, maybe 403 you are not eligible to access the particular resources, forbidden, some authorization failure happen. 404 maybe a resource not found, whatever resource. Two things: one is the content not found, one is resource not found. Particular resource is not available. You can say content particular, maybe one user particular user id is not exist, you can say 404 maybe. So we have to, as a rest while designing, we follow, be carefully standard, these are the standard numbers, so that anyone can understand, hey, this is the length required, very very long list here. So be carefully. Similarly, sometime you are go to the server side error, maybe server has some internal error, a particular function is not implemented, some bad gateway, some gateway timeout, some lots of 5 0 with a series means kiosk server error. And there are some unofficial ports, and different vendors are can define. You can also use, like here the, like some international information, for that you can use the, these are the timeout, login, retry. Similarly, ng annex server have some popular code with a 400 440, like for triple four no response, like 495 certificate is SSL certificate required, yeah, either something. Cloudflare also have some different custom server side error range. AWS have a specific error code, like these are the error code. So you can also available lots of standard code here. So these, you can say, these are the some final conclusion of the day, and this is the just you can say very very simple way to implement and test. So, but while many times we found, as a developer, we are building this REST API, but we are not more aware about the REST architecture, REST patterns, and due to that, we cannot more confidence about the REST. If you know all the REST principle and architectural concerns, and all the status code, all the HTTP methods, and while the implementation you are properly using. If you don't know, okay, hey, we have to implement return proper status code, and a particular situation you can return always 200 200, that's not the good. Let's you focus, hey, we have to return proper status code. If you're not aware, let's google what is the HTTP status code for situation, use this, because these are the very very standard communication between the application. That's for the day. Thank you.